A lot of people didn't know that Zoro had Haki pre-TimeSkip, or a form of Haki pre-TimeSkip. Especially since his captain didn't know how to use Haki until the TimeSkip, and there's no way the vice captain, oh shit, let me not say that. The number 2 can do something like that and the captain couldn't. But what if I told you not only did Zoro have Haki, but he had all versions of advanced Haki pre-TimeSkip? I know that sounds ridiculous. I know, you might think I'm delusional, but hear me out. What Zoro was showcasing pre-TimeSkip didn't look or manifest like the Haki we know today, but it was pretty much described to be almost identical to the applications of Haki we know now. Before we continue guys, make sure you guys take the time to leave a like on the video and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for all the recent subscribers. Hopefully I get to see your guys' name here one day as I'm scrolling through, and hopefully you could be in a video. So in Wano, we learned that Kushiro, I don't know how to say his name, Zoro's master, is a descendant of the Wano people, and described to Zoro what should be a Wano sword technique, and the fans have been calling the breath of all things, for lack of a better term. As you can see, Koshiro even describes the mastery of this technique as the pinnacle of swordsmanship. This technique could literally be the highest possible technique to master among swordsmen in the entire world, while excluding advanced Conqueror's Haki because that's not an ability that everyone can use and learn, so it doesn't apply to the vast majority of swordsmen. And what's interesting as of now is that this technique is essentially a Haki ability confirmed to us in Wano, and I'll get into more of that when I talk about Armament Haki. The highest form of swordsmanship, the breath of all things, is in fact rooted in Haki. Now I'm going to discuss how the breath of all things fits into the current structure we know and how Zoro used it pre-TimeSkip. Firstly, Zoro used the breath of all things in order for it to function similarly or identical to observation Haki against Mr. 1. Here we can see that Zoro showed oh shit, I can't say that word. Zoro showed precognitive abilities, there we go, to dodge the rocks and also sense the location of his sword through the rubble. This is already very similar to basic observation Haki, since we know observation Haki allows you to sense and perceive moments, attacks, and locations of enemies. But deeper than that, it allows you to be attuned with the emotions and intent of living things, allowing you to sense the actions one will take. And it's safe to say that inanimate objects or non-living objects cannot have their intent sensed by observation Haki. That's only if the inanimate objects isn't directly linked to someone. I mainly say this because Enel, the observation Haki crutch, wasn't able to use observation Haki against Luffy because he suppressed his emotions and his intent behind his movements, rendering Enel's Haki useless against Luffy. Zoro sensing his sword in this moment in the rubble can be chalked up to his connection with his sword, blah blah blah. He sensed the sword because he has a connection, blah blah blah. So as we established, observation Haki allows you to sense the intent someone or something that they use will take. But this relates to Zoro because he said he was able to sense and feel where the falling rubble wasn't going to land, using the breath of all things. Rocks have no intent. Like we just discussed, observation Haki allows you to detect someone's intent, or the intent of someone using an inanimate object that has no life to it. You can sense their intent with said object or thing. But rocks have no intent, he could sense. And it's not like those rocks were being controlled by someone. So where they weren't going to land shouldn't realistically be sensed by Zoro if he was using standard observation Haki. Sensing where the rocks weren't going is different from the standard observation Haki we know, since it was basically implied that the breath of all things is indeed a Haki ability by Hirogoro. Being able to cut what you want to cut is what Hirogoro said is the same as the Haki invisible power Luffy was talking about. This leads to the interpretation of Zoro's observation Haki portion of the technique that he used to sense the rocks is some application of Haki we never seen before. Or should I say application of observation Haki we never seen before. And by the way, if you guys are confused, the breath of all things is kind of like observation Haki and Armament Haki in one. So like that's what I kind of mean. Being able to hear your surroundings and the rocks and all that bullshit is essentially what allows you to cut what you wish to cut. So Zoro's observation like sensing within the breath of all things is something we never seen before. Some may even say it's more advanced. And I quote, Zoro says he can hear the earth, the rocks, the trees breathing around him. It's like he's essentially attuned with the earth and non-living things, which I can't recall regular observation Haki allowing you to do. Zoro has shown greater applications of observation Haki than your standard observation, hearing the breathing and the life in non-living things, which is crazy, and being able to detect what it's going to do. Sadly, I don't think we've seen Zoro tap into this again, so I don't know if he's using using this in the current manga. Now let's talk about Armament Haki. The cutting portion of the Breath of All Things is also implied to be the application of advanced Armament Haki. And let me give you a description why that kinda makes sense. To cut nothing and cut anything, in essence, this ability allowed swordsmen to cut things they otherwise shouldn't be able to cut, such as steel, since either the sword they are using isn't built to be capable of this, or them themselves don't have the physical force to pull this off, or both. Therefore, what actually does the cutting ends up being their willpower slash haki. Notice how Zoro uses the same sword with about the same amount of force to not cut the leaves, but he ends up cutting clean through the rock since his will had controlled the capabilities of his sword, and then he proceeds to cut steel. But yet, he failed to do so when he had way more energy at the start of the fight, indicating that his actual physical strength isn't what allowed him to cut steel or to cut that rock. What Zoro did, in my opinion, could be quite similar to Luffy's strategy against Kaido to use Haki to destroy him by bypassing his natural durability. Since we know Zoro's swords never got sharper and he never actually got physically stronger, and using the Breath of All Things, he was able to bypass Bone's natural durability or his steel without actually using more physical force or using more power necessarily. You see how Luffy couldn't get past his defenses or Kaido's tough skin, so he had to get advanced Armament Haki in order to actually do damage? It's the same thing with Zoro. He couldn't cut the steel, but the Breath of All Things allowed him to eventually cut it by using a technique rather than just using more force or more attack power. And this is so similar because here Goro literally says advanced Armament that Luffy wants to learn is exactly the Breath of All Things. Let's talk about it. If you don't want to look at it that way, you guys should already have caught on to how Zoro was indirectly confirmed to have advanced Armament pre-Timeskip because the Breath of All Things is said to be advanced Armament Haki. In Udon, Luffy was trying to achieve the first stage of advanced Armament Haki that he's seen Sentomaru use and Rayleigh. He describes hitting them without touching is an invisible power that he thinks can affect Kaido. Hyogoro then tells Luffy that they also have that power, the invisible power, that stems from the body and infused into the blade. He then proceeds to say a good katana will cut through steel when he wanted to and will not break a sheet of paper if you don't wish so. Where have we heard this before, guys? This is exactly how Zoro's master, I forgot his name already in this video, he directly described the Breath of All Things, exactly how Hyogoro described the invisible power that swordsmen use in Wano. And we know Luffy was referring to advanced Armament Haki that he's seen from Rayleigh, and described as not touching. The Breath of All Things is described identically to what Hyogoro described to be the same thing Luffy was referring to when he was trying to advance his Haki. That might have been confusing or a tongue twister, so just play that again and try to break down exactly what I said, because I don't know how else to explain. But the Breath of All Things is described to be advanced Armament Haki in some way. Now lastly with Conqueror's Haki. This is all up to interpretation, but I do believe it's possible that Zoro's Ashura is technically a form of Conqueror's Haki. With this form, he's basically weaponized a Conqueror's Haki, which could be technically viewed as advanced versions of Conqueror's Haki. Let me explain. Rayleigh said Haki is a power that lies dormant in people everywhere, the ability to sense spiritual energy and overpower enemies. But specifically, Rayleigh said that the power of Conqueror's Haki is the power to overwhelm. Conqueror's Haki is the embodiment of the spirit of the user, or in other words, the embodiment of the will of the user. Now, there's no real explanation on what could possibly allow Zoro to create 9 arms and swords with no dark magic, well, from what we know, with no devil fruit power or scientific ability. The only thing that makes sense is that it's tied to his spirit slash will. And funny enough, that's the description that was given to us by Kaku. Kaku sees Zoro's Ashura form and describes it as visions created by sheer will. And another translation says it's literally illusions created by spirit. Didn't Rayleigh say Conqueror's Haki is the embodiment of one spirit? Zoro manifesting Ashura is the embodiment of his spirit or his will. So Zoro being able to weaponize his spirit or will and create Ashura is how Conqueror's Haki is described. It was also described as the power to overwhelm, which is what Zoro's Ashura is portrayed as when he uses it. He's straight just gonna overwhelm whoever he uses it on. This could also be why Kaido recognized Conqueror's Haki within Zoro when he used Ashura, and not particularly because he bloomed coding in that moment, which, by the way, could definitely be the case, right? I'm not saying that's not the case. I'm just saying that could now be another interpretation if you weren't thinking that. But yeah, guys, that's all I want to talk about. I'm not saying anything I'm saying right now is confirmed because everybody has different interpretations. I'm not saying what I'm saying is concrete. Like, everything I just mentioned is all up to your interpretation. You can interpret everything in different ways. My interpretation is not concrete, but it's an interpretation I think is very interesting. That's pretty much it, guys. Make sure you guys take the time to leave a like, subscribe, and I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace.